Cinderbrew Meadery is a new dungeon we'll be facing in Season 2 of The War Within. The dungeon starts with a 33-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that time frame, you will upgrade your key. Before engaging the first boss, you'll encounter many different mobs in the first room. Venture Pyromaniacs will channel boiling flames at a random player. You need to interrupt this ability as soon as possible as it deals heavy ticking damage over 6 seconds. Healers will need to dispel the Erupting Inferno debuff they place on random players. This dot ticks hard, so use a defensive if you're not getting dispelled, and spread away from your group as it also deals damage to anybody within the targeted circle. Venture Code patrons will mean mug the tank, inflicting high physical damage and leaving a 10-second bleed on them, so tanks should use mitigation when fighting these mobs. Tasting room attendants will toss Cinderbrew at random players. Simply sidestep this swirly to avoid taking big damage and getting disoriented. Hired Muscle will cast Volatile Keg, dealing massive party-wide damage while leaving a horrible 8-second dot. Players should use a personal defensive for this hit, and tanks should be careful what they pull them with. They will also throw chairs at random players, dealing large physical damage, so use a defensive if you're targeted and are low. Finally, before the first boss, we'll take on the mini-boss Chef Chewy. This mob has an aura that increases damage of all its nearby allies by 15%, and makes them immune to CC, so try to pull this mini-boss with minimal mobs. Chewy will cast High Stakes, spawning multiple swirlies that players must avoid or they will suffer huge damage and be stunned. And finally, the Chef will cast an AoE Tenderize, dealing substantial party-wide damage and knocking players back. Be careful not to get knocked back into other mobs here, and use a defensive to mitigate the damage. Now we can take on the first boss, Brewmaster Aldryr. The boss will face a random player's direction and cast a frontal blazing belch that deals heavy fire damage to anybody stood in it, so your whole party must sidestep this cast. Periodically, the boss will keg smash the tank, dealing high upfront physical damage that the tank will need to use a defensive for, but it will also knock them back and spawn hot honey on the floor nearby. Players need to stay out of these honey pools, and these pools are also spawned when the boss casts Throw Cinderbrew at a random player. This leaves a nasty dot for 9 seconds, so when debuffed, you'll want to commit a defensive. Upon reaching 100 energy, the boss will return to the bar and cast Happy Hour. During this phase, he will pulse damage to the party while being immune to damage himself, so healers need to stay on top of this outgoing damage. All players should run to the bar and pick up a mug of Cinderbrew and deliver it to a thirsty patron. Upon quenching 5 patrons, the boss will return to its normal phase and spawn swirlies that will stun players if they do come into contact with them. Rinse and repeat this fight, and then after defeating Aldryr, you can path either left or right, but in this guide we'll head left to the next boss, Epa. But not before we encounter many new mobs. Flavor Scientists will cast Rejuvenating Honey. This must be interrupted or it will place a heal on an enemy for 18 seconds, though it can be purged or dispelled if it does go through. Most notably though, these mobs will spawn a failed batch barrel that all players must immediately swap to and kill before it completes its explosive brew cast. If successful, this will deal fatal damage to all players and leave a nasty dot for 8 seconds, likely resulting in a wipe. Careless Hobgoblins will target a random player with Reckless Delivery, charging at the player and knocking back anyone in its path, so everybody including the target needs to dodge this once the cast finishes. Once the Hobgoblin hits a wall, it will inflict huge party-wide damage and stun itself for 3 seconds, so use a defensive if you're not healthy here. This charge will also spawn brew drops which the tank needs to pick up aggro on while players cleave them down, and the same happens when the Hobgoblin dies. Taste Testers will cast free samples at random players that needs to be interrupted. This deals large fire damage if successful. The Testers will also buff their own damage greatly with Spill Drink. You can delay this cast with hard CC like stuns or disorients, but it will recast its ability, just be prepared to kick every free samples cast. Next up, we'll take on Epa. When this boss reaches 100 energy, it will begin to channel Spouting Stout, inflicting party-wide damage that players will need to use a defensive for, as well as dropping puddles of ichor on the ground that players must avoid. This cast will also form 3 brew drops which all DPS must immediately nuke before they come into contact with the boss, because upon doing so, each ichor will inflict huge damage to your whole group and shield the boss for 10% of its maximum health, so keep them CC'd while you quickly kill them. Tanks can also help out here by kiting the boss away. Once you kill a brew drop, it will then drop oozing honey on the ground that deals damage to players stood within it, and this honey will shrink over time and upon dissipating will spawn a brew drop for a second time, which again needs to be nuked. Epa will also periodically afflict 2 players with Burning Fermentation, which deals ticking damage over 16 seconds. Healers will need to dispel this as soon as possible, and if you're the second dispel, you'll want to commit a defensive. Finally, tanks will need to mitigate the boss's bottom's uppercut. This hit deals heavy physical damage and knocks the tank back. Moving on to the other side of the dungeon, we'll face many new mobs before we engage the third boss in this guide. Worker Bees will leap to a random player with Shredding Sting, leaving a strong bleed for 10 seconds that can stack, so use a defensive if you get low here. Once these bees get to low HP, they will cast a final sting on the tank, dealing massive fire damage that can prove fatal, so use stuns and hard CC to stop or delay this cast. Failing that, tanks should be prepared with defensives. Bee Wranglers will target random players with Beezooka, dealing moderate fire damage to anybody stood in its path, so stand still with it and pop a defensive, and let everybody around you move. You'll also need to be ready to kick them when they cast Bestial Wrath, as this enrages all nearby bees to deal 25% increased damage for 15 seconds. Ventureco Honey Harvesters will cast Beeswax. This marks a circle around them that will deal lethal nature damage and stun players caught within it, so move away. They will also cast Swarming Surprise, dealing massive party-wide damage and increasing damage taken from future Swarming Surprises by 40%. You'll want to commit defensives to later surprises, and this makes these Harvester mobs a priority to kill. Royal Jelly Purveyors will cast Honey Volley, which must be interrupted. A successful cast will deal massive AoE damage and slow all players by 70%. They will also cast Rain of Honey, spawning multiple swirlies that players must avoid. Finally, Beelits will apply a stacking poison and bee venom, dealing ticking damage every 2 seconds and slowing them, and this can stack. Classes that can should dispel this poison where possible, but tanks use defensives if you gain high stacks. Now we can take on the third boss, Benk Buzzbee. The boss will periodically cast Snack Time, dropping 3 barrels around the encounter that will spawn ravenous Cinderbees every 30 seconds. These ads will again cast Shredding Sting on random players, leaving a stackable bleed for 10 seconds. All players should swap and nuke these bees down quickly, as once they are defeated, you can mount them and use their Bee Whore ability to destroy any existing barrels. Note that you can destroy more than 1 barrel at a time here. This is the main mechanic of the fight, so just make sure to stay on top of killing and mounting the bees. Benk will target a random player with Honey Marinade, dealing large area of effect damage after 5 seconds, so this player needs to stay clear of your group. Upon exploding, this will also drop a flaming honey puddle on the floor that will deal damage to players, but it will also heal and increase the haste of any ads that come into contact with it, as well as making them immune to crowd control, so try and place these puddles towards the edges. Occasionally, Buzzbee will channel Fluttering Wings, dealing huge group-wide damage while pushing your whole group back, so you'll want to commit defensives during this phase, and healers should be prepared to out-heal the incoming damage. After defeating Benk, you'll head back to the first room and mount the bees to the final boss platform, where we'll have to take on 4 Yes Men. All of these mobs boast a field promotion aura that heals them to full once another Yes Man dies, as well as increasing their damage by 10%, so you'll want to mark a target for your whole party to focus on killing to avoid wasting time by padding with AoE. These mobs will also target the ground with Downward Trend, dealing huge damage and leaving a bleed on anybody caught within the targeted area, so simply sidestep this swirly. Goldie Baronbottom is the last boss of the dungeon. She will cast Spread the Love, spawning lots of explosive barrels around the encounter, some of these being volatile, marked by a fiery highlight. The goal of this fight is to break as many barrels as you can with the boss's abilities, but be aware that once any barrel is destroyed, it will trigger a Cinder Boom, firing out waves in 4 directions that all players must make sure to dodge. You will, however, only want to destroy 1 or 2 volatile barrels at a time, as they trigger a Cindering Wound Dot on your whole party for 6 seconds that can stack, and quickly cause a wipe if too many stacks are applied. Tanks will need to use mitigation and face away the Cash Cannon frontal, while also destroying as many barrels as possible. And the rest of your party will want to position themselves on as many barrels as they can with the Burning Ricochet debuff, which will destroy them upon expiration. You'll want to use a defensive here if targeted, and remember to dodge the waves coming out of the barrels after. Upon reaching 100 energy, Baronbottom will jump to her table and let it hail, triggering every barrel in the room and dealing large AoE damage. Use the defensive for this cast, especially if there is still volatile barrels active, and position yourself away from any remaining barrels to make dodging the waves much easier. But that's it for this boss, and that wraps up Cinderbrew Meadery for Mythic Plus in Season 2. If you're interested in my nameplates, they are from my free plates profile, which can be found inside my Discord. The link will be in the description. And if this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below, subscribe to your boy for more dungeon guides, and until next time, I'll catch you guys later.